to now introduce Christa, our first speaker. Christa has more than 20 years of experience in managing clinical trials in a broad range of diseases, including many orphan and pediatric indications. Christa is co-owner and director of clinical operations in the PSR Group, a services company specializing in clinical development of medicines for rare diseases. During her career, Christa has successfully led a department of dedicated clinical research professionals who are also responsible for the setup, management, and monitoring of complex clinical trials across Europe and the US. Let's welcome Christa.
Thank you, Laura, for that introduction. It's a real pleasure for me to be presenting here for this audience. So I will talk about patient recruitment, and I thought it would be useful to very shortly introduce the type of company that I work for, because I'm not sure everyone is familiar with the concept of contract research organization. So I did a little Wordle, and just to give you a bit of an idea, so we're a service provider. We don't have any own drug products that we develop, so we don't sell drugs. We don't develop them ourselves, but we are usually hired by pharma companies, biotech companies, to help them in their drug development, and then specifically in the clinical research, the clinical trials. So we're not involved with all the lab work that goes before the clinical trials. We just provide a lot of services that have to do with the clinical trials themselves. And more specifically, yes, we are a company, so we're a contract research organization. There are a lot of them around, some very large ones. We're quite small. We're located in the Netherlands, but we cover trials across all of Europe, and we are completely focused in the niche area of orphan drugs. So I would say about 95% of our work is with orphan drugs, and we really like and value to work closely together with patient organizations. We found that that's extremely useful, and win-win situation for everyone. We've now won twice the so-called ROAR Award for Best Orphan Drug CRO. Very proud of that. And we're also actively involved in fundraising. The little picture you see here is a picture of the Amsterdam canals, and we're actually swimming with several colleagues. We're swimming here in the Amsterdam canals to raise funds for the neuromuscular disease ALS. We've been doing that now for 3 years in a row. Great fun, and raising a lot of money. And we're also involved in 2 publicly funded projects. One is in alkaptonuria, which Flora mentioned as well, and the other in a very rare and very horrible eye disease. So those are the, let's say, non-commercial projects that we're involved in. Now moving to the real topic of my presentation, which is patient recruitment in rare diseases. So what I call the classical patient recruitment strategies are those strategies that people in the pharmaceutical industry have been using for decades in all the common diseases. So by common diseases, I mean hypertension, diabetes, asthma, you name it. So classical strategies would be identifying doctors who do a lot of clinical research, have huge patient populations. You offer them quite a bit of money, and they will try to interest their patients in participating in this clinical trial. They usually have a lot of competitive clinical trials. They might be working on 6 clinical trials at the same time. They have a whole team of research assistants who help them do all the clinical trials. They might put up posters in their waiting room, or you can do posters at GPs' waiting rooms, put advertisements in newspapers, in magazines. But it has turned out that this does not work in rare disease trials. So see if you're all kept awake. Who would know why these strategies would not work in rare disease trials? Any suggestions from the audience? instance, yeah, the doctors may only have one patient with this rare disease, so you don't have large patient pools. Other reasons why this wouldn't work.
Well, in the first place.
Excuse me?
Diagnosis in the first place. Diagnosis.
Oh, diagnosis in the first place. Absolutely valid point. Yeah. And you also had a suggestion?
No, I was saying I worked in rare disease and for CRO, so it's not fair to say things, but yeah, because normally in a traditional trial, you go to the country, then you go to the site, then you see the patients, as you highlighted there, a large pool. It's like a pyramid. Countries at the bottom, sites, patients, but in the rare disease, you just go upside down. Find a patient, then you go and see which site, and then you go to that country.
Yeah.
So that's the strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, which factors, before we go into which strategies have proven to be efficient and successful in rare disease trials, there are a couple of factors which are crucial to patient recruitment in rare diseases, which make rare disease trials different from common disease trials. So first of all, of course, small patient numbers, the obvious. Then you don't have centers in every town, hospitals in every town where they treat these patients. No, the patients are very often, I wouldn't say always, but very often centralized into these, what we call expert centers. So very often a very limited number of expert centers per country, depending obviously also on how rare the disease is, but also on the size of the country. So for instance, in the Netherlands, where I'm from, small country, most rare diseases are just treated at one single site in the Netherlands. Patients from all over the country, it's like maximum 2.5 to 3 hour drive wherever you are in the Netherlands, and they will all go to one physician, one expert in the country. UK, obviously, you have a bit more, but still, which also means that one expert center covers a large geographical area. These expert centers generally have very extensive knowledge of the disease, are usually very dedicated to be involved with their patients and also to help develop a possible treatment. But on the other hand, very often have very limited clinical trial experience. Also because of the fact that very often in these rare diseases there has not been that much clinical research previously. I know it's a bit different for some diseases where there has already been a lot of drug development in the last few years, but a lot of diseases it's there's not so much precedence yet. Very often the studies involve children, because a lot of the rare diseases are genetic and a lot of the diseases already start showing symptoms at early age. That makes clinical trials also more complicated. The good thing is that usually you have very highly motivated patients, or in case of pediatric studies, parents. And something to really keep in mind is that rare disease patients and parents are very active on the internet as compared to patients with common disease. Simply because of the fact that if you have diabetes, you surely will have some people in your environment, in your family or close friends who also have the disease, who you can talk to, how they manage their disease. In rare diseases, that's often not the case, so a lot of people use internet to be in contact with other patients or parents. So this is also the reason why I've made this little graph, which shows how we think graphically the whole setup of the network, creating a network and awareness, how it should look, and that's the key to success for patient recruitment for clinical trials. So I put here in the middle what we call key opinion leader, that's the medical expert. Then you have the physician who is actually treating the patients. This is a clinical research organization, of course, I put our own logo here. But central you see the patient and the medical expert. Then you have the cloud with all the different websites and the internet communities. And very important, the patient organization, patient advocacy group, as we sometimes call it, the PAG. And this really, these people and companies or organizations all need to work together towards the same goal. This is the only way that really works. So the strategies which we found over doing orphan drug trials in the last couple of years that we found to be most successful is, and you see again the large bar at the top, collaboration with the patient support groups being absolutely crucial. And we really see that if we start doing an orphan drug trial and there is a well-organized patient organization, that will make the whole study so much more successful than if there is no patient organization or a patient organization that is not well structured. They can be of huge help. The ways in which they can help and we can have a joint collaboration is partly discussing the suggested clinical trial sites. So we might have some ideas, or the company actually developing the drug will often have some suggestions. They know some experts around Europe where we could involve them as a clinical trial site, but very often also a patient organization will have suggestions because they know where their patients are being treated, which physicians they are going to. So that might be very valuable for us to collaborate and see if those physicians might be a suitable trial site. Also, very importantly, because these patients or parents know best what is acceptable for them or their children with regard to patient burden and also logistical. So partly logistical burden, traveling to the sites, etc., and also physical burden from all the measurements and assessments that need to be done. I luckily have 2 healthy children, and I know having some blood taken from them, if that's ever needed, is an absolute nightmare. But I know from some parents I've been speaking to who have chronically ill children, and they say, oh, they're so used to having blood drawn and having things done in the hospitals. They don't really mind 1 extra blood draw or not. That's not an issue. If that helps the research, fine, no problem. So it's for people who don't have the disease or who don't have children with the disease, very difficult to get a good idea on what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So that's important for us to take along. We also try to ask, and it depends a little bit on how well the people that are in the patient group, whether they have some form of scientific background or other relevant background. But sometimes it can be very valuable to ask the patient group also for input in the clinical trial protocol. So that's really the document that describes exactly what needs to be done in a clinical trial. And there are sometimes very good suggestions come from that. And of course we like to know from the patient group if they know how in other European countries patients are organized. Do they have sister organizations that we can collaborate with? Can we maybe help set up other groups in other countries? Something we can look at and discuss. And something that we've now had one example of, and that has proven to be very successful, and that's with the AKU Society, where they actually had a dedicated patient recruitment officer within the patient group, where actually this person took on a large part of the responsibility of the patient recruitment, instead of the sites themselves, for instance, or the contract research organization. And this has proven to be very successful because the patients already have an established relationship with the patient group. They trust them. They they feel that they can get independent information from the patient group, that the patient group always really tries to keep their best interest in mind. So that has proven to be very successful in this trial that we're currently doing, which is pan-European, so we're recruiting patients from all across Europe. So that's a very good strategy. And of course, altogether, a smart selection of clinical trial sites and also referral sites. So some sites might not be willing to or able to act as an active clinical trial site, actually performing the clinical trial, but they might be very willing to refer patients that they are treating to another site, to another hospital. And generally we see that in the rare disease world there is much less competition between physicians than in the common disease world. In hypertension, it's all big egos, and doctors don't want to refer a patient to another hospital. But in the orphan drug world, that's different. Most physicians know that there is no good treatment available, and they want to help to make this possible. So some things that you can do is organize, and that we've done in the past successfully, organize patient meetings, for instance, at expert centers, together with the treating physician at that site, who is already in a relationship with the patients. That could help. We've done webinars in the past to inform patients about upcoming clinical trials. Obviously, sending mailings, emailings, whatever, to the patients that are known. Make use of websites and other relevant rare disease websites. So there's plenty of those around. And make use of social media. It's a bit new in clinical research to really use Facebook, Twitter, etc. But again, it's proven to be quite successful. And ethics committees are starting to accept it more and more, and the regulators as well. They're slowly seeing that it's inevitable that also modern media are being used, and it's not unethical as such, as long as you are very careful with the information that you do post. Talking about the ethical considerations, of course we know that rare disease patients and parents are often very motivated to participate in a clinical trial. Can be different if there is already a successful treatment on the market. Then of course the motivation to take the burden of participating in a clinical trial will reduce. But this fact has positives and negatives. So the upside is of course that relatively high burden is still often accepted. And even what we've seen also quite a lot in rare diseases, even if a patient, him or herself, knows that he will probably not benefit from the treatment himself because, for instance, the disease has already progressed to such a stage that the treatment will probably not help him anymore or her, they often choose to participate for altruistic reasons. The downside is, of course, that we need to be extra careful that patients and parents don't say yes too easily, that they are aware of the possible risks of their rights, that it's purely voluntary, that they can always quit the study at any time point without being pressured or without even having to explain the reason why. And we need to be careful that when they do say no, that we respect that wish, and they don't need to defend themselves. So, as a final thought, something that I highlighted previously on the slide as well, in my opinion, the key to successful patient recruitment in rare disease trials is creating awareness and a network with all the relevant stakeholders, and a very important role for the patient groups. Thank you very much.